My goal with this video is to help working college students learn how to study effectively with basically no time so that they can still earn better grades even though they have a short window of time to actually get their studying done. One of the things that I want to mention is that you don't actually need a lot of time in order to do well as a student. What you need is to know what to do during the window of time that you do have to study. And the strategies that I'm going to teach you in this video today aren't anything new. Like, you've probably watched hundreds of videos on this same topic before, but I want you to stick to the end of the video because the one thing that is not being talked about by people who are giving these same strategies and tips is that the very thing that you need to do in order to study effectively goes against what your brain is naturally motivated to do. You're not going to want to apply these study strategies. You're actually going to find yourself feeling a lot of resistance to doing them because they cause a lot of discomfort. They make you feel really dumb. They make you feel like you're not understanding the material. But if that happens, nothing has gone wrong. And towards the end of the video, I am going to teach you strategies on how to actually work with the natural motivations of the brain so that you do not sabotage yourself and you can study consistently and become that student that you desire to be. So if you're new to this YouTube channel, my name is Clarissa. I'm an academic life coach. I have been for the past 6 years, and this is what I do for a living. I'm basically a learning coach, a learning strategist, along with the mindset coach for college students. And the first thing that I want to say is that everything that you do to study works. Mind maps, writing your notes, typing your notes, using flashcards, using study guides, using practice exams, using an outline to take notes. All of these study strategies that you've heard of, the highlighting, the rereading, the re-listening to your lecture, it all works. It's just that there are certain study strategies that have been scientifically proven to be more effective than others. What I mean by more effective is that they allow you to retain the information for longer. It actually gets stored in your long-term memory versus just staying in your short-term memory. So the reason why these study strategies are recommended so much is because, number one, they're less time consuming. But number two, it's because of how they allow you to retain the information, which is what is really required for learning. So the first study strategy that I'm going to tell you about today is what is called retrieval practice or quiz and recall. So this is the act of testing yourself on the content you're learning without referencing your notes. You've either heard it called retrieval practice or quiz and recall. And in my world, to the students that I work with, we call it testing to make sure. And the reason why we call it testing to make sure is because we want to test ourselves to make sure that we're actually retaining the information. Because the issue that I see with most students is that they are really attracted to study strategies that aren't as effective. So these are study strategies like rereading our notes, highlighting our notes, summarizing our notes, re-listening to our lectures. And the reason why we're so attracted to these study strategies is because they make us feel really good. They make us feel like we're being productive. They make us feel like we're actually getting work done. They make us feel like we're actually studying. And who doesn't want to feel like they're being a good student, like they're being productive? The problem with rereading our notes, highlighting, rewriting our notes, re-listening to lecture is that it causes a false illusion that we know the information. It causes a false familiarity with the information. And what I mean by that is just because something is familiar doesn't mean that you know it. And the example that I give students all of the time is you can be a frequent gym goer. You're there every single day at 5 in the morning, along with all the other people that are there every day at 5 in the morning. And you might see them all of the time, be familiar with what they look like, but do you know their name? Do you know where they work? Do you know if they're a parent? Do you know what they do for a living? Do you actually know anything about them besides the fact that they're there Monday through Friday at 5 a.m. the same time that you are? The likelihood and the probability is not. Just because something looks familiar, or you've heard it before, or you've seen it before, doesn't mean that you actually understand it and that you know it. And the problem with rereading, rewriting, like looking over our highlights, re-listening to lecture, is that they give us this false sense that we know the information when really we're just familiar with it. So not only is rereading, rewriting, re-listening time consuming, it also doesn't actually tell us whether or not we know or don't know the information. And as human beings, it's very natural for us, like this is just the way that we are. We are terrible judges of our own knowledge. We are terrible judges of our own knowledge gaps, meaning that we do not have a good gauge on what we know and what we don't know until we're put in a situation where we're asked to prove it, i.e. a test or an exam, which is the worst place to find out whether or not you actually knew or didn't know the information. So when you use a study strategy like retrieval practice, quiz and recall, testing to make sure, different words that all mean the same thing, the reason why it's so effective is because it forces you to look at the reality. It forces you to recall from your memory an explanation of the content, a description of the content. You're being forced to actually see what you know and what you don't know. And there's a lot of neuroscience, science on the brain, science on memory, that has been done over centuries. Like these study strategies, they're not new. They've been around for hundreds of years. They've been studied for hundreds of years. And what they show us is that retrieval practice and quiz and recall, the reason why it works so well is because the way that our brain works is the more effort it has to put in to recall something, the stronger the neural pathways in the brain become. And the neural pathways in our brain call things from our long-term memory. So if you use quiz and recall, not only is it helping to shatter the illusion of knowing and actually allows us to calibrate our judgment of what we've learned so we can actually be prepared, but just the simple act of putting our brain through the horrible act, because it does feel horrible, of trying to answer something without looking at our notes strengthens the neural pathway, which means the next time we're being asked to recall it, our brain fires a lot quicker and it's able to access that information a lot faster. And that is what learning is truly about. So the one thing that no one's talking about when it comes to retrieval practice, quiz and recall, testing to make sure, is that the true magic of it isn't testing yourself with flashcards, Anki, or quiz and recall. The magic isn't like in the testing yourself of the questions. The magic of it truly comes from it revealing to you where your knowledge gaps are. Because now you're forced to look at, what don't I know? Where am I confused? What is it that I don't get? Where is there information that I do not have a good enough foundation on to be able to build upon? And when you can ask yourself those questions while you're studying, it allows you to do the necessary work to encode that information. And encoding is just the process that your brain goes through to sort information, to store it in our long-term memory, okay? And before information can go into our long-term memory, our brain has to categorize it and make sense of it. And this requires effort, it requires time. a lot of the things that you guys do not want to spend doing as students, but it really makes all of the difference, okay? It's not just the quizzing that's important. It's the self-evaluation that you have to do as a result of the quizzing. Because when you realize, oh shit, I do not know that, or I keep getting it mixed up, or I'm confused, you're forced to ask yourself why. What is it that I'm not getting? What do I need to help fill in the knowledge gap? And it's the work required to fill in the knowledge gap that's the true magic of the retrieval practice, quiz, and recall study strategy. And I do not hear enough YouTube study gurus talking about that. They are talking about retrieval practice and quiz and recall, but they're not really diving into that. The reason why it's so effective is because it shatters that illusion of knowing, and now you're forced to do the actual encoding learning work, the actual understanding work, which is going to make all the difference in you being able to retain, recall, apply that information in the way that it's going to be asked of you on the exam. So study tip number 1 is using retrieval practice, quiz, and recall, but making sure that you're doing the self-evaluation once you're done to see where your knowledge gaps are, and then you're doing the work to fill in the knowledge gaps. Okay, so study tip number 2 is spacing out your retrieval practice, spacing out your quiz and recall, spacing out your testing to make sure. So in and of itself, time and time again, studies have shown that retrieval, quiz, and recall is one of the most effective ways to study. And there are a lot of videos here that go into the research on YouTube. Okay, if you just type in evidence-based study strategies, you will find a lot of videos of people giving you the actual research. I'm not going to waste your time with that here because I don't think that you actually need to understand the research in order to apply this. But if you're a nerd like me, where I learned this was in 2 books. So the first book is called Make It Stick: The Science of Successful Learning. And then the second book is called How We Learn and Why It Happens. So How We Learn and Why It Happens. And these books are like coffee stain. Like I have 10 years of like using these books. So just want to, if you want to go into the research of it and like find all the studies, because you need that in order for your brain to believe what it is that I'm saying, just YouTube evidence-based study strategies and you'll find a shit ton of videos on it, or you can go out and buy yourself these books if you need that information. But what I'm telling you is that retrieval practice is where it's at, as long as you're doing the self-evaluation and then doing the filling of the knowledge gaps. That's the missing piece that no one's talking about, okay? So the second thing is spacing out your retrieval practice, quiz and recall practice sessions. The reason why this is important is because of something called the forgetting curve, okay? So that whole use it or lose it principle that you hear people talking about, it's actually true. There's science behind it. There have been a lot of neuroscience studies, so again, science done, research done on the brain to back it all up. And it started with some guy named Hermann Ebbinghaus, who was a researcher, the first researcher to actually plot out the forgetting curve. The forgetting curve is named after him. And so he first plotted out the forgetting curve in 1850 or something like that. And basically what he did is that he learned something today, and then he kept track of how long it took him to forget what he just learned. So this study, that initial study, has been repeated many times, and it has been replicated many times. And in the scientific world, it means that it's actually true if it's replicatable, okay? So basically what the study proved is that within about a week of first learning something, you forget about 70% of it. So if you were to read a chapter today and you never looked at it again, within 5 to 7 days, you would forget about 70% of what you just read, studied, wrote notes on, listened to, and lecture. Okay. Shocking, right? This is why you hear a lot of study strategies and study tips around looking at, reviewing, the content that you're learning about. But I've already shown you the reason why just rereading and re-listening isn't going to be effective enough, because it gives a false sense of knowing, okay? So what we want to do is we want to stick to the retrieval. We want to stick to the quiz and recall, but we want to do it over a spaced amount of time, because what the study showed was that if you interrupt the learning curve, so if we know that on day 5, we've already forgotten 70% of the material, if you actually test yourself maybe on day 2 or day 3, it actually, what it does is it starts to flatten out the curve. So every single time you test yourself on it, you slow down the rate of forgetting. Okay, so you slow down the rate of forgetting every single time. Now, here is what I know you're going to ask me. How soon after writing notes on a chapter or on a note or my initial quiz and recall session should I be spacing it out? And the only study that I have found was actually in the book, How We Learn. And they did a study in 2008 with about 1,300 plus students. And they basically created these different sets of like retrieval practice schedules, right? So they broke it down like this group of students, they would, learn the content today and then test themselves on it a week later. These sets of students, they would learn the content today, test themselves 2 days from now, and then test themselves a week from now. And they basically gathered all of that research, and then they took the average of everything. And what they found is that if your exam is a week away, the best time that you want to do your first initial quiz and recall, and remember, quiz and recall is when you put all your notes away and you test yourself on the content, either with questions that you've created, with questions from the back of the book, with practice exams, by just randomly asking yourself questions out loud, etc. So if you learn it today, you want to do your first testing either sometime later that day or 1 day later. So if you learn it on a Monday, you want to test yourself no later than Wednesday. And then you want to test yourself 2 to 3 days before the actual exam comes around. So you learn it on a Monday, you test yourself the first time on Wednesday, and then Sunday, let's say your exam is next Monday, then either Saturday or Sunday, you want to be testing yourself on that again. Now remember, it's not just testing yourself on the content. It's not just doing your practice test. It's not just asking yourself the questions. It's not just flipping through the flashcards, turning them over and seeing if you know it. It's paying attention to what you don't know, doing the self-evaluation and making sure that you're filling in the knowledge gaps when you're realizing, I keep getting these questions wrong. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just memorizing. I don't actually understand this. You have to do the self-evaluation to fill in the knowledge gaps, okay? So study tip number 1 was quiz and recall / retrieval practice. In my world, I call it testing to make sure you actually know it. Study strategy number 2 is using retrieval practice, but spacing it out so that we interrupt the forgetting curve. Because if you don't test yourself soon enough, you're going to forget too much of the information and it's going to feel like you're having to relearn it again from the beginning. We don't want to get you to a point where you've basically forgotten everything that you have to reteach it to yourself. We want to test ourselves where we still kind of know it, but we're getting to the point of forgetting, okay? And so I just gave you an example. If your test is a week away, then you want to, like if you're learning it on a Monday, a day or 2 later, you should be testing yourself on it for the first time. And then a couple days before your exam, you should be testing yourself on it again. Now, what the studies have shown is that the more you test yourself, the more you retain the information, but you have to give enough time in between your testing sessions to forget so that your brain has to do the work to bring it to memory. Is everyone still following? Please comment. I am fueled by your comments. It also helps me to know where you're not understanding things or I'm not explaining them well enough, or you're needing more videos on it. So I use your comments to not only know that you're following along, but I also use the comments to help me to create more videos that help to answer where you're specifically needing help and support, okay? So the third study strategy is, I'm bringing up my notes, y'all, called interleaving. I'm going to take a sip of my tea. So the third study strategy is called interleaving, or mixing it up. So interleaving is the opposite of blocked practice. And it involves switching up what you're studying between 2 or more subjects or 2 or more topics within that same subject. Okay, what do I mean by this? Okay, so to give you an example, blocked studying or blocked practice would look like you spending all day Monday just studying physics. Tuesday, you're spending all day studying just calculus. Wednesday, you're spending all day studying just biology. Okay, so that's what blocked studying looks like. Another example of blocked practice or blocked studying is if you're taking a math class and you have a 5-chapter exam, and chapter 1 is on addition, chapter 2 is on subtraction, and you spend all day just doing questions on subtraction, and then tomorrow you spend all day just doing questions on addition. That's blocked practice. Interleaving or mixing it up is the opposite of that. So what I mean is that you would spend 2 hours studying math on Monday and then 2 hours studying chemistry. Or an hour studying math, an hour studying chemistry, then an hour back to math, and then an hour back to chemistry. In the chapter example, it would look like you doing problems on addition for an hour and then problems on subtraction for an hour. And then tomorrow you do it again. So you're mixing up either the subjects, so the courses that you're taking, or you're mixing up the topics within that subject. The reason why this works scientifically is because cognitive psychologists believe that interleaving improves the brain's ability to differentiate. It improves your ability to discriminate between concepts, and it strengthens your memory associations. Now, the reason why this is important is because the way that our memory works, okay, the memory in our brain, the way that it works is when it receives input, whether it's audio, visual, sensory, okay, when it gets input, your brain goes to work to sort what it's receiving. It categorizes it. Oh, this is a word. Oh, this is a food. Oh, this is a sound, right? And it's looking for a place to categorize it and put it inside of the brain, okay? And then it stores it in long-term memory. That's how our memory in our brain works, okay? That's also called encoding, okay? Encoding is when your brain initially learns something, the process it has to go through to store it in long-term memory. That's encoding, okay? When we get tests, when we get papers, when we get presentations, when we get assignments on our exams, okay, a lot of the time they're not straightforward, okay? What I mean by that is rarely, unless you literally have to memorize like body parts or something like that, rarely do you get questions where it's like define what this is. When you're in college and university level, master's level, PhD level, right? Because I'm talking about all higher education, it's no different, okay? It is no different. All higher education is the fucking same, okay? Okay. You're going to be asked these higher level questions. In order to be able to answer higher level questions, you have to know how to think, okay? And thinking requires you to be able to differentiate between things, to discriminate between concepts, to make sense of them, to group them together, to use them to answer another question. And so what interleaving does is it forces your brain to do that categorization. It forces your brain to like switch back and forth and say, okay, we're learning subtraction, and these are the principles for subtraction, and then these are the principles for additions, and your brain has to do the work to say how they're similar, how they're different, when you would use this, when you would use that. All of that is going to help you to be a better test taker, okay? All of that is super important. Now, we don't want to be crazy in our switching up. We don't want to do switching up too frequently, right? We want to switch up when we've learned a concept, or when we just have started to master it, okay? Then we'll switch to something else, because if you do it too frequently, then it's like multitasking and you're not focused on anything, okay? So this is why I say, maybe you do chapter 1 in chemistry and then you do chapter 2 in biology on the same day, okay? Breaking it up that way. So that's just an example of that. An example where you can use interleaving inside of quiz and recall or retrieval practice is doing like a full-on practice exam for your class, because in a full-on practice exam, your professor is mixing up questions from all the different chapters that are covered on that exam. Another way that interleaving can work is with your flashcards, right? Don't just study all of chapter 1, like mix in chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 5, like all of the chapters that are going to be covered in your exam, and don't like group them together, mix them up so your brain is having to like do that extra work, okay? So just to recap, study strategy number 1, quiz and recall retrieval practice. Study strategy number 2 is spacing out your retrieval practice. Study strategy number 3 is interleaving, or mixing up what it is that you're learning so that your brain has to do the work to create categorizations, differentiations, and like bounce between different ideas. All of these things, they sound counterintuitive. And they also sound hard, because they are, and they're meant to be. The hardest thing your brain will ever do is learn. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard. If you find yourself feeling like, I do not know anything, my brain is frying right now, trying to understand and make sense of this and figure out how I want to organize it, good. That's the way learning is supposed to feel. It's supposed to feel that way. Nothing has gone wrong if that is what you're experiencing, okay? The thing that no one else is talking about, okay? The thing that you won't hear on other videos, the thing that no one is talking about, is that in order to even get to the point where you can use retrieval practice, where you can use interleaving, where you can use spaced repetition, you truly have to have learned and understood the information first. And this is the step that most students want to skip and fast forward through. The part where you're in lecture, trying to make sense of the information. The part where you're reading the textbook, trying to make sense of the information. The part where you're trying to figure out how to organize your notes and make, the best connections between the content. You're all trying to rush through that process, and that's literally the most important part. The only reason why we study is to learn. Okay? Learning and studying are two separate things. If you're inside of my program, Educated, The Art of Becoming a Good Student, where I teach students how to build study routines based off of all this neuroscience and evidence-based practice stuff, you've heard me say this before. You got to actually do the learning before you can test yourself to see what you know. There's nothing to test yourself on if you haven't learned anything. And most students want to skip the learning part because the learning part is the hardest part. It sucks and it takes time and effort. And we want to rush through it. So whenever we hear like quick, easy, fast tips, we're all over it because it reduces our cognitive load. And I said it a little bit earlier. The way that the brain stores things in long-term memory is by categorizing. It's by making connections to things that are already there. If you can get better at helping your brain make those connections and those associations and really understand how to make sense of that information when you're initially learning it, reading, lecture, like the first time that you're being exposed to the information, you're going to make it so much easier for yourself to do well on your exams. And your quizzing and recalling goes so much faster because you're going to be able to retain things better because you're helping your brain do the work it needs to do to store things in long-term memory when you're doing your initial learning. So this is why you hear me talk a lot about not stressing how long it's taking you to learn the content, because the whole point of it is for you to learn the content. And if you're trying to rush the learning, it's going to be reflected in your grades because you're not going to have actually learned it. Making sense? The thing is, it has to feel hard. You have to put the effort in, okay? The amount of effort you put in matters in the initial learning of the content. I promise you that it's going to make everything else so much easier. The issue is that none of us are being taught how to sit through the discomfort of the effort required to actually learn. Because you feel really dumb. It feels like your brain is breaking while you're going through this process. And we don't want to feel dumb. We don't want to feel like our brain is breaking. We want to feel productive and like we're learning and we're doing things. And so that's why the rereading and the highlighting and the re-listening and even just the act of like making your flashcards but not actually using them feels really good. But it's not, you're not learning if you're doing those things. If it doesn't feel hard, if it doesn't feel like your brain is breaking, if you're not like having to force yourself to think about the content that you're learning and how it makes sense and why it makes sense and the reason why we're using this equation and this problem and the reason why we're talking about these things and how it relates to something else and how we're going to use it. If you're not asking yourself those questions, you're not doing the actual learning required. Okay, you're just memorizing, you're just going through the motions, and it will reflect in your grades. Okay, it will reflect in your grades. Cramming works, y'all. There are studies in the book How We Learn, they talk about them. In the book Make It Stick, they talk about it. There are studies showing cramming works if you take a test immediately after you do the cramming. But try to take it a day later and you don't do well. And the problem is that most of our classes, the information stacks and builds. So if you didn't have a good foundation at the beginning, good luck catching up. Good luck catching up. Are we with me here? So not only are we bypassing the actual work that needs to be done to do well as a student, but then our brain has something in it called the motivational triad. It's literally the 3 things that the brain is motivated by. And the 3 things that the brain is motivated by goes directly against how the brain learns. So it just feels like we're screwed from every angle. And this is why, I talk about these things, because if you don't feel like studying, if you find yourself avoiding it and resisting it, you're actually more normal than you think. You don't need to be more motivated. You don't need to be more disciplined. That's not the problem, right? It's that what's required to learn goes against what the brain is motivated by. The brain is motivated by seeking out pleasure, so things that feel easy and good and bring out, those really feel good emotions where we're proud of ourselves and we're feeling productive and yeah, I got this and I'm doing so well. Our brain wants to feel that all of the time. The second thing is that the brain runs away from anything that is uncomfortable or painful. So it can either be physical pain that you experience or emotional pain. The brain will run away from it. It'll try to escape those situations, whether it's an actual situation or just like us thinking about things in our brain, like thinking about studying. And then the third thing that the brain is motivated by is conserving energy. It doesn't want to put in effort. We're naturally lazy people. We are built this way, to be naturally lazy. And the reason why the brain is motivated by all those 3 things is because it keeps us alive. And all the brain wants to do is to keep us alive. Our brain actually doesn't care about growth and evolution in the way that we think about it. It doesn't care about your goals outside of you staying alive. Like the brain's number 1 and only goal is to stay alive. And it thinks that if it seeks out pleasure, if it avoids any sort of pain, if it can conserve energy so that when it actually needs it to protect itself, that's all it cares about. And I just told you that to learn requires effort. That to learn requires you putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. That learning is not pleasurable. So on the one hand, you need to do all of those things to actually learn. And on the other hand, your brain is like, no, not doing it. So what we have to learn, the skill set that we have to learn as human beings who have made the choice to enroll in higher education, is how to work with the brain's natural motivators. We have to learn how to hack the brain. Okay. So not only do you need to understand the study strategies that actually yield to the grades it is that you want, but you also have to learn the personal development, the emotional management skills necessary to override the brain's natural tendency to want to be lazy and to not put in effort. And this is the reason why when I work with students, I don't just work with them on the study strategy piece. We actually spend a lot of time on the emotional management, the mindset management, because of the way the brain is naturally motivated. So if you find yourself procrastinating, if you find yourself, being lazy, again, nothing has gone wrong. This is the way that we've been built as human beings. But that's just our primal survival instincts. We have another part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex that does care about growth and evolution and our goals outside of just staying alive. But that part of the brain isn't as practiced, okay? That part of the brain is like a really skinny muscle that we need to grow, that we need to tap into. And again, these are skills that we're not taught in colleges and universities. We're expected to just kind of have them. but no one's actually teaching us how to cultivate and build up those skills. And then the funny thing is that right now, if you're paying attention to what's happening in the economic space and in the job market, there is going to be this like huge employment crisis, because companies are finding that students are coming out of college and they have these degrees, but they don't actually have the soft skills to do the job. And what I mean by soft skills is goal setting skills, follow through skills, emotional intelligence skills, the ability to get yourself to do something even when you don't want to, communication skills, the ability to lead yourself, all of the things that I teach my students, because I really know what's going on and what's actually going to make the difference. This is the stuff that we need to be talking about more, because I promise you, the study strategy piece of it is the easiest part of it. That's so easy and so simple. And I can teach it to you so quickly. It's the getting you to actually do it consistently and long enough to see the results it is that you want that's difficult if you don't have the right skills. So one of the ways that you can learn those skills is just continue watching this YouTube channel and this space. The second way, if you're someone that wants more interaction, is to work with me in some capacity, either one-on-one or inside of my group coaching program for college women that's called Educated: The Art of Becoming a Good Student. But if you're not ready to make that jump and to work with me in that close of a capacity, or you're not ready to make the financial investment that is involved with working with me, the best place for you to start, quite honestly, is by downloading my anti-procrastination guide for the college woman who's brilliant and tired of failing. Because inside of this guide, I actually teach you the brain science stuff that helps you to learn how to stop procrastinating and to get yourself to show up even when you don't feel like it. And I normally, in the description box of the video, the link is there. It might not actually be there in this moment. I don't remember if I put it there before I did this live stream because we got cut off. So what I want you to do is that when this live stream ends, give me like 5 or 10 minutes, because we had all the internet issues, right? So I need to go in and put in the description again and all of that so that you can watch the video. In the description box, the link to the anti-procrastination guide will be in there. Let me see if I can actually pull it up on my computer right now and drop it in the comments for y'all. Let me see if I can be tech savvy enough. And then if you watched this video and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I get it. I see why all of this stuff is important. And you have questions like, how do I create questions, or where do I find questions to test myself? I have quite a few videos on this YouTube channel already where I dive into that. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I just uploaded a video on how to write notes that you can then use as a quiz and recall tool. I also have a video on how to create your own study guides that you can use as a quiz and recall tool already on this YouTube channel. If you're thinking about how to prepare for final exams because you're listening to me talk about why the space retrieval is important in regards to the forgetting curve, I have a final exam study strategy video on this YouTube channel already as well. Literally everything that you want to know, I've probably already filmed a video on it because I'm just so good like that. And you gotta go beyond just watching it, okay? You guys gotta stop watching YouTube videos to feel good about yourself. It's the equivalent of rereading your notes. Watching a video over 10 times because listening to it makes you feel like you can do it. It's not the same as you actually doing it. And I'm going to tell you, the process of you doing it is not going to feel as good as watching the video. But if you can learn how to get through that discomfort, in my world with the students that I work with, you guys know that I call it the pit of despair. If you can learn how to move through it, get yourself through it, you're going to have everything that you desire as a student. The problem is that our society failed us. Quite honestly, they haven't taught us those crucial life skills of how to actually sit through discomfort. How do you keep going when you're feeling dumb? How do you keep going when you're like feeling like you want to bang your head against the wall because the content is so hard to understand and grasp and you feel like giving up? If you can learn the skills to help yourself move through that, there is nothing that you're not going to be able to accomplish, because this same process that you're experiencing with schoolwork is what you're going to experience your entire life. Because every stage of your life is going to require you to learn new things, to grow, to expand and evolve. And with that is always going to come discomfort. With that is always going to come moments where you're frustrated and you don't know how to figure it out and it feels hard. And the key, the magic, your expansion, your growth into the next version of yourself is going to come from your ability to be able to move yourself through that, okay? And again, no one's talking about this, but I've been talking about it for years, and this is why my students see as much success and growth as they have, because not only are they just listening to me talk about these things, but they're actually doing the work in their real life. And the reason why they're doing the work is because they know that the discomfort is normal and they have the skills to get themselves through the discomfort. Okay. Thank you guys for joining me on this live stream. We are going to be live every Thursday with SheRocks at College Live at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm going to figure out the internet situation, because right now I'm hooked up to my phone's internet because my house internet somehow kicked me out, so that we don't have those tech issues at the beginning. So make sure that you turn on the notification bell on this YouTube channel, that you subscribe if you just happen to find me randomly, because this is the type of content that you can expect from me. The real, raw, honest truth about what it takes to succeed. There's no sugar coating over here. There's no illusion of being perfect. I'm going to give it to you like people really experience it, because we need to normalize what it looks like to be on the path of becoming everything that we desire, because the path looks messy. And the messy is required to have what it is that we want. Again, thank you for watching. I will see you next Thursday at 2 p.m. Bye.